Very welcome everybody to this pre-Pesach program, which is called Let's Talk About Freedom. And before we start our program, I need to just do a little bit of housekeeping jobs. And first of all, I have to do the thank yous. The first thank you has to go to Shoshana. Because most of the things that go on in this community in education, this wouldn't have happened without
you didn't use the microphone.
So Shoshana, who is very modestly sitting at the back there, deserves our great thanks for putting on not only this program, but all the other programs that she is involved in. Sometimes we are bombarded with WhatsApps and flyers from Shoshana. Sometimes we can get 15 in a day. But just think about it, she has to make those 15, and she puts her heart and soul into it. I don't care who makes them, she makes them as far as I'm concerned. And Shoshana, we thank you for all your efforts. Okay, now a few more thank yous before we start. Natalia Rabinowitz, thank you for the refreshments. Richard, who's not here, whose microphone we're using, and Nechama, thank you for sorting out some support for us from the Iriak and for all the things that you do in our community. Rich, very, very much appreciated. Philip, thank you for picking up Rabbi Cordoza and private bodyguard. He did ask me to find somebody else to take him home, but I couldn't find anybody else, so okay. I also would like to welcome Phyllis Ulrich, who has yahrzeit tonight, I think, for her brother, Moshe Yaakov Ben Israel. Oh, there she is, yes. And we wish you a fine King, and thank you very much for your support to this program. Okay, so as you'll know from the flyer, you did get the flyer, didn't you? Yes. As you'll know from the flyer, I'm the hors d'oeuvre, and Rabbanit Karen Jackson Miller, or Miller Jackson, I don't even bother trying to tell me which one it is because I always get it wrong, so I'll say both of them. She is the main course. I'm going to leave them. Lean into freedom, and then we will be having our dessert will be provided by some sweet thoughts about freedom. That's the program for this evening. We'll be having a break after Rabbanit Jackson Miller Jackson, and during that time we will have Mariv because Mariv is going on right now in school, and we didn't quite coordinate it as we might have done. So that is the order of proceedings. I'm just going to check before I begin that the Zoomers can hear me okay. Johnny, can you give me the, yes, Stephen's giving me the thumbs up, they can hear me. Okay, so let's start by asking the question, what is freedom? We are about to begin Pesach preparations for the holiday, preparations for the food and the cleaning and all those things, preparations for Leila Seder night, and of course the overriding and overarching theme of Pesach is freedom. But I want to ask in the next 20 minutes or so, what is freedom? How do we individually relate to the idea of freedom? And I would like to start by quoting a rather unusual source. I doubt that this source has been quoted in many shuls up until now, but have a listen to this. Okay, so that was, of course, the Redemption Song by Bob Marley. And the important piece that I wanted to stress from Bob Marley's lyrics there is actually not originally written by Bob Marley. Those of you who are listening carefully may even know this. The song urges listeners to emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. And these lines were actually taken from a speech by a chap called Marcus Garvey, who was a Jamaican political activist in 1937. The idea was that although the black population at that time were still feeling the effects of hundreds of years of slavery, they felt that they could only emancipate themselves from their mental slavery. None but our Sorry, there we go, we're unmuted. Sorry about that, everybody, on Zoom. Okay, so Dr. Eager says that freedom means responsibility. Freedom means that we have to take responsibility for our actions. It reminds me of a famous story. It's apocryphal, probably, and you may have heard it, but it's worth repeating. A little boy is on the beach, and he wanders into the sea, and he starts to be in trouble with the waves. The waves come along and just start to bring him into the sea, and he's starting to drown. A passer-by sees he's in trouble, jumps in, swims out and saves him, brings him back to the shore to his grateful parents, and the parents say to him, "Oh, thank you so much for saving our child's life. Thank you so much. How can we ever repay you?" He says, "I'll tell you how you can repay me. Make sure that the life that I have just saved was worth saving." Very chilling story, no? So this is what Dr. Eager says freedom is. Freedom is when we have been freed from being a prisoner. She went through hell and back several times. She was freed from that, and she took on responsibility to do what she could do to make sure that her life that had been liberated by those American soldiers was worth living, and she took on that responsibility. So for Bob Marley and for the story that I told you about Natan Sharansky, for them, freedom was mental freedom. For Dr. Eager, it means responsibility to others, responsibility to make your life something worthwhile. And both of those things fit very well with the concept of freedom as understood in the Jewish religion. Rabbi Sachs talks about the concept of the Exodus from Egypt being the building blocks for building a society of freedom. And he specifically mentions three different aspects. As you all know, it is a positive commandment. It's a mitzvah to say. Twice a day, we have to mention the Exodus from Egypt. I mean, have you ever thought about this? We're obsessed with Egypt, aren't we? We're obsessed with coming out of Egypt. Zeichel Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Kiddush, the Shema, it's everywhere. Wherever you look, Zeichel Yetziat Mitzrayim, in memory of the Exodus from Egypt. Enough already, you know, we know. Leave it alone. No, we can't leave it alone, because it is the fundamental start of our journey in this world. We were freed from the slavery of Egypt. Let me say that again. We were freed from the slavery of Egypt. So what did I say? We were freed from something. But that's not enough. To be freed from something is only half a job. 49 days later, we as a people, having been freed from slavery in Egypt, stood at the bottom of Har Sinai and received the Torah. And what is the Torah? What is it? It's 630 commandments, yes, and you know, all of that, and all the things that go with it, and the Talmud and the Mishnah and everything else. But what is it really? What it really is what Hillel said when he was confronted by a prospective convert who said, "Teach me the entire Torah on one leg." And he said, I guess he stood on one leg, and he said, "That which is hateful to you, don't do it to anybody else." Now go and learn. The rest of it's all commentary. Akiva, Rabbi Akiva, the famous Rabbi Akiva, said, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha." You shall love your neighbor like yourself. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. This is the great rule of the Torah. If we boil down everything in the Torah, it's about social justice. Everything that we do is about social justice. And freedom from must lead to freedom to do something. If we're only freed from something And we don't use that freedom to do something and to do something positive, like the little boy who was saved by the man from the sea. If we don't do that, then our freedom is not worth anything. So let's just have a look at those three ideas that Rabbi Sachs brings out. The first thing he says is that by receiving the Torah, by coming out of Egypt and receiving the Torah, the first idea was to look after the orphan and the widow and the vulnerable. And that is mentioned numerous times in the Torah. Equality. And what was Bob Marley speaking all about? Lack of equality, slavery. And so the Torah, although it doesn't abolish slavery, because that was just something that wasn't in its historical context, if you look at the Torah's approach to the widow, the orphan, and the vulnerable, it was revolutionary at that time. To us, it's second nature. But you know why it's second nature to us? Because for 3,300 years we've had the Torah, and the Western world has adopted the Torah. The so-called Judeo-Christian values, which are really just Judaic values, they come from the Torah. And the whole of the Western society, of the ideals of Western society, that when I say the ideal way it should be run, is based on the Torah. So the first thing is equality. Care for the stranger, care for the widow and the orphan. The second thing is how the Torah enjoins us to deal with the stranger. Now, the stranger may not be a widow or an orphan, or may not be poor, maybe a rich stranger. A stranger has a certain vulnerability. Any of you ever been to a new place? You arrive. All of us have. We're all in here. We all arrived in this place, vulnerable, didn't know anybody, maybe one or two people we knew. And what happened? People around you welcomed you. They welcomed you with open arms. They said, "We're so happy to see you. Come, join our community, join our school, join our programs, come to our house, be our guests." Do you know how many times the Torah tells us to be nice to strangers? More than any other mitzvah in the Torah. 36 times. 36 is twice 18. 18 is high. High means to live. You live twice if you look after the strangers. You live in this world and you live in the next world. The Torah enjoins us to look after the widow and the orphan. That's number one. The stranger, number two. And the third thing that the Torah tells us about, the third fundamental that we received at Sinai, which was as a result of our freedom from slavery, was freedom in time. Shabbat. Shabbat. As a slave, you don't have a Shabbat. You do what your master tells you to do. Master tells you to work 7 days a week, you work 7 days a week. End of. Torah comes along and says, no. What does the Torah tell you about Shabbat? It doesn't tell you just to rest. It tells you, you, your son, your daughter, your servant, your maidservant, even your animals get to rest 1 day a week. This was revolutionary. Again, nothing new for us, but only because this is what the Torah tells us that we have to do. That's where it all started. And it came 49 days after being released from slavery. So, to sum up, we have an idea of mental freedom, which means that nobody can tell you how to think, nobody can tell you what to think, and nobody can force you to think in a way that you don't want to think. And that's something that's very, very important at the moment in our country, which is being torn apart by different factions who are trying to force other people to think the way they think. That's not mental freedom. Debate, by all means. Speak, argue, discuss, but keep it civil. Don't resort to language that we've heard on both sides of the argument, which is not befitting for Jewish people or any people to be speaking. I read articles, and I read an article the other day from somebody who lives in this community, who wrote, things like the word leftist is sprayed about like a machine gun. Why is it necessary to use such language when you're trying to persuade somebody of your argument? If you have to resort to that kind of language, that's not mental freedom. You're depriving others of mental freedom by bullying them and using that kind of language. So debate by all means, but don't try and remove the freedom of others to think the way they wish to think. So mental freedom is one thing. Dr. Eger tells us that with freedom comes responsibility. Responsibility to make the life that we have been given. Baruch Hashem, we are all here in this wonderful country, despite all that's going on, it's a wonderful country, in this wonderful community, and we have all been given opportunities. Are we all making the most of those opportunities? Are we all taking responsibility in our communities, in our countries? Are we all taking responsibility in our families? These are questions that Dr. Eger would have us ask. We are fortunate we've never been slaves. I've never been a slave. I suspect most of you have never been slaves. Certainly not the way she was. But we all have a responsibility to use the freedom that we've been given in that manner. And finally, we take Rabbi Sachs's idea that the whole point of freedom from something is freedom to do something. It enjoins us, it forces us, it makes us do this that we have to do because we were released from slavery in Egypt, and that's why we're so obsessed with it. That's why we keep on saying twice a day, Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim. That's why we mention it in Kiddush. That's why we mention it in the Shemona Esrei of Yom Tov. That's why it's there wherever you look. It's there because it's a reminder that yes, we have been freed from, but now we have to take that responsibility and we have to use that freedom from slavery into something positive, freedom to do things. Let's all think about those things and ask ourselves, whatever we're doing, we can always do more. Let's ask ourselves, what more can I do with the freedom that I've been granted? What more can I do between this Pesach and next Pesach? Set yourself a goal, an individual goal, an achievable goal, that I am going to do something positive. Doesn't really matter what it is, as long as it's positive. I am going to use that freedom that I've been granted to do something positive. So I would say, in conclusion, that freedom is something which doesn't come lightly. It comes with a price, and that price is for us to do what needs to be done within our communities and within our people. Thank you very much. Rabbanit, Karen, go on, which way round is it? Miller Jackson, Jackson Miller. Miller Jackson, okay, how many remember this? We're here, I got it wrong every time. Okay, so I have to remember this now. N comes after J in the alphabet, so I have to remember that it's the opposite way around. Okay. MJ. MJ, doesn't help me. Okay, Rabbanit Karen Miller Jackson is going to share with us now. Lean into freedom. Thank you.
Hello, everyone on Zoom. Okay, hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. So nice to see my familiar faces of my students and friends who I've been studying with, Mir Yamim. And I really want to encourage anyone who would like to join. Generally, the class is attended by women, but Shoshana, men are welcome as well, right, during the year. So our classes, pretty much. But in any case, we're going to get to the women, but particularly the women are invited to join us. We have such a wonderful group, and we learn at really a deep and meaningful level. And I really encourage anyone who's free Thursdays at 10:30. We'll be starting again after Pesach. It is a pleasure to be here, an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me to be here. The kavod to be at this table of Rabbi Cordozo, who I have learned so much from your writing. And I'm also very fond of your daughter and son-in-law. Some of my friends. So we'll begin. So tonight we're talking about freedom. And what I'd like to do with you now is my friends here who know me know that instead of lecturing, I really like to interact with you. So we're going to do some serious learning. We are within the 30 days before Pesach and coming up to Rosh Chodesh when we're supposed to be focusing our minds in preparation for the Pesach Seder, for Pesach, not just in terms of the food we eat, but also in terms of our souls and our hearts. So and that's what I'd like to do with you here. The topic that we're talking about, lean into freedom, what I'd specifically like to focus on is one small part of the Seder. But before we get to that, I want to just begin with a question and ask you, what is the most significant part of Seder night for you? What do you see as, what are the main mitzvot? Let's say that. What are the main mitzvot of Seder nights? Okay, matzah, excellent. Arba kosot. We got it to the bincha. I'm gonna, excellent. What else? Anything else? Yes, excellent. Okay, you've touched on almost everything. Okay, the questions. Anything else? Great. The food. Lots of food. Yes. Okay. And what's so interesting, you're all correct. You're all correct. And what I'd like to pause and think about for a moment is, first of all, nobody mentioned the topic of today's class, which is reclining, leaning. Okay. What is this thing? What is this thing that we do? Perhaps all of you do it, perhaps at your Seders, sometimes only the Seder leader does it. People have different minhagim. And we're going to look at the evolution of the mitzvah, what's called haseba, leaning, reclining, right? When you lean to the left while you're having certain foods and the 4 cups of wine. Where does this come from? And as we read through the texts, the origins of this idea, we're going to see how it's very closely related to the theme of freedom, and specifically how this one act, this one thing, I think gets to the hearts of Seder nights and what we're supposed to draw from Seder, what we're supposed to be taking away in terms of freedom. And it's also a model. It's a model for all year long in general. So where does this idea of leaning, reclining at the Seder come from? Where are we told? Now, first of all, you mentioned matzah and you mentioned arba kosot. How do we know we eat matzah on Seder night? Where does it tell us we have to eat matzah? The Torah. Where does it tell us we need to v'higadat levincha, right? What's her name? Renee mentioned v'higadat levincha, to tell the story, the Magid section of the Haggadah. That is straight out of the Torah, okay? What about the arba kosot? How do we know what to drink the arba kosot, the 4 cups of wine? Okay, the Mishnah, excellent. So this puts the finger on something which is super fascinating about Pesach Seder. Pesach Seder, as we have it today, took a long time. It was part of a huge evolution to get to this point of the way the Seder looks today. And there are times in history where there were big changes to how the Seder went along. Now, arba kosot is the 4 cups of wine is something, as Rabbi Johnny mentioned, which we know from the Mishnah in Tractate Pesachim. The entire Talmud Pesachim, which is 10 chapters long, tells us all about Pesach and how to prepare for Pesach. And when we get to chapter 10 of Mishnah Pesachim, chapter 10 of Mishnah Pesachim lays out for us the order of the Seder and how we do it. And that is the basis of how we do Seder nights. The interesting thing is that whereas matzah and maror, and we haven't mentioned the Pesach sacrifice and telling the story, are all part of Pesach as it appears in the Torah, in the Tanakh. The idea of drinking the 4 cups of wine is a little less clear. We have to rely on the rabbis, the sages, the oral Torah to teach us that that also has a basis in the Torah, which is what's called the 4 languages of redemption, okay? And we parallel the 4 languages of redemption to the 4 cups. This is all just an introduction to get to the question that I want to probe with you tonight, which is, well then, where does this reclining thing come from? Where does this start to be a part of the Pesach experience, the Seder experience? Yeah, what's your name?
It came from the Romans. The Romans
Oh.
used to
Excellent, what's your name?
Philip.
Philip, okay. Okay, so fantastic. So one possible origin for the idea that we reclined a meal is that we borrowed it. Okay, we took it from the Greco-Romans. Now, one possible reading on that is that the rabbis lived at the time of the Greco-Romans, and they looked around them and they saw a model for what nobility, royalty, what the upper class did, how they had a meal, how they sat a meal. And they saw that they were reclining on those, you know, you've ever seen those sort of cheap lounges. Now, it's not like what we do today, where we just sort of lean a little bit. They were literally like almost laying down. If anyone's been to Herodian or the museums where you see these lounge sofas. And so the question is, okay, so they saw this model of the free people in their society, the elite of their society, and perhaps this is one reading that they said, that's what we should be doing on Seder night. We want to be as free as possible. In our society, this is what freedom looks like. So we will borrow it. How do you feel about that, Philip? Do you like that? Do you think that's okay? Anyone have a problem with it? Does this trouble any of you, this idea? Okay. So first of all, we prefer original ideas, but even more, is this not problematic? Yes. What does it mean that we took this key part of Seder night, where we are expressing the fact that we left Egypt, that we chose to be brave, those of the Jews that chose to be brave and leave Egypt and have faith in Hashem and accept the Torah. What does this reclining Greco-Roman thing have as a place at our Seder? So I'm going to leave that question open, and we're going to continue to explore it as we read about Haseba and sources. We'll begin. You'll remember that I mentioned that in Mishnah 10, in chapter 10 of Mishnayot Sahim, there we began to hear the process of the Seder. Now, the first Mishnah is the first mention of this idea of reclining. And it says as follows. Source 1, Arvei Psachim Samuch Lemincha, Lo Yochal Adam Ad Shetitashach. V'afilu Ani Shel Yisrael Lo Yochal Ad Sheyitzeh. Okay, I'm going to go on to that again, but just to translate, the context is that we're not even yet at Seder night. We're being told just before Seder night, one should not eat from the afternoon until the Seder, until it gets dark. Even a poor person in Israel should not eat until they recline. And then it goes on to say that also even the poorest people need to have wine for the 4 cups of wine on Seder night. But I'm going to leave that aside because it's not for us tonight. It's not important for us tonight. The thing I want to focus on is that just the first thing we are hearing about in our introduction to how we do a Seder, because what comes after this in Mishnah chapter 10 is the structure of the Seder. You pour the first cup, you make Kiddush, you pour the second cup, and you say the Magid section, and you have Manishtana, and you go on, then the third cup, and all the things you have to talk about, the Pesach Matzah Maror, and the fourth cup. This is the introduction. And in the introduction, now, of course, introductions are important, right? It has a key part of Seder. It tells us. What does it tell us about Haseba? First of all, who knows what Haseba is at this point? The Mishnah is just throwing it at us. The Ani in Israel cannot eat at Seder night until they do Haseba. I think this actually relates quite nicely to one of the things Rabbi Johnny was talking about. And we're going to see that this is a key element of Haseba, reclining. The Mishnah begins by saying, it says, the poor person has to recline. Even the poor person, even the person who might not feel free, who might feel limited, who might feel they don't have everything they need for Seder, even that person needs to take part in this mitzvah. So this is already giving us some insights into what the Jewish Haseba looks like. And this should already start to perk our ears up a little and think, well, if it's taken straight from the Greco-Roman, then already we're seeing something different. We're already seeing something different here because in Greco-Roman society, the poor people were not reclining on the couches with the nobility and the leaders. And so we're going to continue to explore that theme in just a moment. But because since we are just starting to understand what is reclining, what is Haseba, we have to look to our commentary on the Mishnah, the Rashbam, to explain to us in source 2, what exactly is Haseba? What does it symbolize? So says the Rashbam, if you can't follow me deeper, I'm going to translate, don't worry. ב-40 פסחים עד שיצב כדרך בני חורין במיטה ועל השולחן זכר לחירות. Says the Rashbam, this is what Haseba is. This is, Haseba represents, this is how people who were free ate. People who are free ate on a bed, literally like a sofa bed at the table. And this is to commemorate the Chirut. This is how we commemorate Chirut. What are your thoughts so far about Haseba? How does Haseba, how does reclining connect us in some way with freedom? And do you have any questions about Haseba today? If Haseba, for the rabbis in the time of the Talmud, meant, they saw in their society that this is what this meant. Well, if we were, let's say, Rambam living in the Middle Ages and looked around at what freedom looked like at a meal, nobody was reclining on couches in the Middle Ages to eat their meal. And if we look around today in 2023, even though some of us would like to be reclining on our couches on Seder night, nobody's doing that. And so what does this mean for us? So we'll continue to learn more about Haseba and we'll keep going. In source 3, we're going to look at 2 sections of the Talmud. And this is going to be a little bit tricky, so bear with me. I'm going to translate everything, don't worry. But we're going to jump into the Talmud. The Talmud says as follows. The Talmud asks, when do we recline? Okay, we haven't discussed this. Now, of course, what happens in the oral Torah is that we have Mishnah. The Mishnah gives a very succinct law, and then the Talmud elaborates. And the Talmud tries to understand how to apply this law. So who reclines and for how long? And when? Because we certainly don't recline the entire time, right? When don't we recline at the Seder? What foods do we not recline for? Excellent, Mara, great to see you, just checking. Okay, so says the Talmud, "Va'afilu she'ani she'Yisrael lo yochal et she'yaseh, itamar, matzah tzarich haseba, maror ein tzarich haseba." So just like you said, matzah, when you eat matzah, you need to lean. But when you eat maror, you don't lean. Why would this be? Okay, quite intuitively, matzah represents freedom. It represents the matzah we ate as we were going on our way out. The maror represents 100% represents bitterness. And so we don't lean when we are remembering the bitterness of slavery. Now we have a confusing little section in the Talmud, which I'll summarize for you. It says as follows. We have 2 statements of a rabbi called Rav Nachman. And the weird thing is that we have conflicting statements, both by a rabbi called Rav Nachman. One person came to the table and said, Rav Nachman says that you need to do Haseba during the 4 cups of wine, okay? And another person said you don't need to. So what's going on here? Remember, this was an oral tradition, and the rabbis were collecting statements of the rabbi. They were collecting statements. So we have a contradiction here. We have one opinion that the 4 cups of wine require leaning, and another opinion that the 4 cups of wine don't require leaning. Okay, now what would you say? Should the 4 cups of wine require leaning? Okay. Did you know this coming up? Oh, good job. So first of all, let's just start with yes. The 4 cups of wine are like the matzah. They represent our geula, our redemption. Why are we not leaning for them? So it turns out that the rabbis suggested, as Philip said, that perhaps Rav Nachman was only referring to 2 out of the 4 cups of wine. And when he said you don't lean, he was either referring to the first 2 or to the last 2. And the Gemara makes some interesting arguments to support this idea. But in the end of the day, It certainly makes more sense to say that at the very least you would lean for the second 2 cups of wine. That's right, the second half of the Seder when you are already free. But the Gemara concludes that we should actually make a compromise, and something that in Israel is a hot topic today. The Talmud makes a compromise and decides that because they can't decide if Rav Nachman was talking about leaning during the first 2 cups or the second 2 cups, the Gemara concludes all 4 cups we should lean for, which makes a lot of sense, and that is what we do today. Now we're going to turn to our next page. So we see from our first Gemara and from the Mishnah before that reclining is about a physical posture during Seder night. And it's meant to have some effect on us. And this is something that we have in other areas of Judaism. Sometimes during Tefillah, when we bow down, when we stand up, when we sit down, when we cover our eyes for Shema, we're doing things because anyone who here likes yoga or any sort of thing where the movement of your body is meant to have an impact on how you feel, on your inner state. What are you doing? So here, the Gemara is pointing out that we recline when we want to experience the freedom, when we are eating the foods connected to freedom. And that this is actually a physical behavior, a physical posture, which we want to have some effect on and to experience the freedom ourselves. And we're going to see this comes out more. But now the question is, who does Haseba? Now, we already saw who does Haseba so far. Who has to do Haseba? We didn't learn that yet. The poor person, okay? Now, if we want to say that Seder night is about being all-inclusive and that the poor person, the reason why we mention the poor person in the Mishnah is that we want everyone to take part in this Mishnah. So we would think that everyone is involved. However, we're going to see that
Everybody can have it.
exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Now we're going to see the Talmud, though, suggests that there are some people who aren't included in reclining, who don't, let's just say, who don't have to, okay? Not necessarily can't, but don't have to. So first of all, says the Gemara on page 2, that lying on one's back is not called reclining. You have to lay a certain way. Interestingly, the Gemara says, "Hasebat yamin lo shmei." You cannot lean to the right. You have to lean to the left. And the Gemara explains that this is related to the anatomy, okay? And that, I don't know if there are any doctors here to confirm this, but there is apparently some basis for this, that leaning to the left is safer than leaning to the right.
Whether you have a right hand or left hand.
Doesn't matter, because it has to
With your right hand.
That's why.
That's why you keep your sword.
That's why when you do stretching exercises, you should start on the right side, not on the left side.
Why is that?
Because of the anatomy.
Uh-huh.
Because, for instance, the way the intestines go,
Oh, interesting.
they start on the right, doctor.
The reason
The wind
what I was talking about is actually the right main bronchus. You have the trachea, the windpipe, it splits into the 2 lungs. The right main bronchus is more straight than the left. So if you look at a cadaver or you look at a picture on Google of the lungs, you'll see that the trachea splits into 2, but it's not an equilateral triangle. The right main bronchus is slightly straighter than the left. So therefore, it means that
You have more danger of choking on the right.
of something going straight down into the trachea, into the lung. If it goes into the trachea on the left-hand side, it's got more of an angle to go in, and it's more likely to be then coughed up. That's the theory anyway.
These people think that they have this knowledge. They have this knowledge in Talmudic times, which is really quite amazing. But now we get to our next line, and this is where we start to have some problems, start to have some trouble. Here it says to us, if you're in the English, it's about 4 lines down, and in the Gemara, in the original language, 2 lines down. Isha, etzel ba'ala, lo ba'ya haseba. A woman is with her husband, does not need to recline. V'im isha hashuba hi tzricha haseba. But if she's an important woman, then she does need to recline. So here Here we start to have a little bit of trouble because if we're talking about reclining as being something that includes everyone, then we can't understand why the Gemara is suggesting this. So what would be a reason why the Gemara would exempt a woman from reclining? Sorry. Oh, okay. So I get the answer a lot when I mention this. The interesting thing is women are required in most of Seder night. Women are required in eating the matzah. Women are required to take part in the 4 cups. Women were part of the miracle of the Exodus. So if they are required to eat the matzah and drink the 4 meal party called a symposium. And at the symposium, they did a lot of things which looks quite similar to our Seder, but we're going to see it's also very different. They drank wine, they had long philosophical conversations about a particular topic, they sang hymns, songs of praise. So there were interesting parallels to our Seder, and they also reclined while eating. And so some people want to say that, some historians like to say that, you know, the Seder sort of borrowed and modeled on that. I think even if the rabbis were well aware of the parallels, I think our Seder is something different, and we're going to get to that at the end. But in those symposium, in those Greco-Roman parties, the women were mostly not there, were mostly not reclining. Uh-huh.
You don't want to talk about that.
Okay.
You don't do that.
Yes, correct. You can see, yes.
The concept. He didn't have it. The kind of model of our Kodesh. So maybe they learned it from the Greco-Romans, but the rabbis elevated it to a different level.
Okay.
It's, you know, part of the mitzvah. The other thing is, even the Rambam, you can't, because the idea that, you know, the huge dining room table that we're used to came in much later. Well, there's still a lot of Middle Eastern.
That's right.
They sit
Yes.
with little tables that
Yes.
can be picked up and removed the way the Mishnah is.
Yes, that's the origin of the Seder plate. Yes.
described it.
Yeah.
And they sat on cushions or couches. Probably because it was close to the ground and it was cold.
Yes. Yes.
That's what everybody saw. And that's the description you're getting it, whether it's Greco-Roman or whether it's.
Right.
It was done.
Right. Okay. I totally agree with you, and we're gonna get to that a little more at the end. So, so just to circle back to the issue of the women, okay? So we have on the one hand the statement that women don't do it either because they're subservient to their husband or it's not the way of women. And the other possibility is the line of Jewish authorities, of Jewish legal authorities who said that nashim, kulo nashim didan chashuvot. All of our women, now this is rabbis in the Middle Ages saying, today, all of our women are important. And so all of our women should lead. Already in the Middle Ages. Now, I don't think this is a, you know, I'm all for feminism, but I don't think this is a statement of feminism coming from the Middle Ages. But I think it's a reading. And now I want to take a step back and redeem the Talmud. I don't think the Talmud is being harsh here. I think the Talmud is struggling with this question of Teva reclining is meant to represent freedom, and everyone takes part in freedom on Seder night. And so their language might sound to us kind of exclusionary toward women, but they've actually done something brilliant in the Talmud, the rabbis. They've left open the option for it to be required or certainly encouraged for women to take part, because they said women don't have to unless she's an important woman, a woman of status. Okay, you don't like that. Yes, I agree with you. I think that we have to take ourselves back to an historical time where really women had when we weren't educated, women really went from their father's house to their husband's house. And in fact, one source talks about widows being required to leave, because then, you know, there's sort of interesting readings of what this is. But by the Middle Ages, we already see arguments for women to leave. When we get to source 8, when we get to the more modern works of halacha, like the Shulchan Aruch actually follows the Talmud and leaves it optional, says women don't have to leave unless she's important, meaning she can, she doesn't have to do. And the Ramah, the Ashkenazi gloss on the Shulchan Aruch, says all women are important. He quotes that position that all women are important, but he also mentions that the women in his time didn't really necessarily recline. Yet it becomes, certainly, I think today in many modern communities, it's becoming certainly more and more common that everyone leaves. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good question, right? Why doesn't they too were included in the miracle, that argument, which we use for women being required in hearing the Megillah, and for women drinking the 4 cups of wine, why isn't that used here? That's really interesting question. And in the end, the reclining is connected to the 4 cups of wine and the matzah. And so I don't have an answer for that, but I think the rabbis are grappling with that. I think that's why, I think they have that in the back of their minds, and that's why they're bringing this here. Women should be. Since we're quite engrossed in this, I'll just quickly read to you from the final page. Modern halachic authority, Rabbi Chaim David Halevi, who says as follows. Rabbi Chaim David Halevi was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, Sephardic chief rabbi in the 1970s, and this is an English translation of his words, says as follows. The rationale for the position that a woman who is in the presence of her husband does not recline has expired. Okay, and therefore, no, not halakha. The explanations, okay, the rationale. Okay, therefore the halakha should be changed. The language is quite strong. Perhaps at different times or places, the fear of a woman's husband was upon her and she was subjugated to him. However, this is not true nowadays, as no woman is subjugated to her husband and the fear of him is not upon her. She therefore must recline, okay, not can, must recline. I think you're putting your finger on a very important point, and now I'm going to get to that, which is that when I think about the mitzvah of Haseba, we're starting to see, I want to bring 3 major points out of Haseba related to freedom, okay? The first one is that freedom, I think that what Haseba is communicating to us is that sometimes trying to access freedom for ourselves, we need some sort of prompt, we need some sort of help. And this idea of physically reenacting the reclining and the Rambam saying, that is a way to access whatever the freedom is that we're looking for. That is one way to do it. The second thing, which gets to this question, I think Haseba highlights the adaptability and flexibility that we have in Torah, in Halakha, and in Jewish life. We don't always feel it. And remember, we're looking at the evolution of a process over thousands of, right, over hundreds of years at least, okay, not over 1,000, where we have from the Talmud, it never says women cannot. It never uses that language. And we have this in a lot of things in Judaism. It never says women cannot, but it says women don't, okay, unless, and then there's an opening, or we call it something to allow a change, okay? And look at what I've learning Talmud for millions of years, right? Who could have imagined that I'd be coming here and teaching you some Talmud, right? So this is something there were a few people who said they couldn't, but for the most part, Halakha allowed it. It just never came to fruition until it was a possible reality starting in the 1970s till today. So Haseba too, there was a process, an evolution. But I think that this adaptability and flexibility of Haseba, we see it with regard to women, okay? But we also see it because Haseba is only an important part of Pesach and the Seder from the Second Temple Mishnah, from the time the temple was destroyed. We only start to see Haseba on the scene as a part of the Pesach experience from the time the temple was destroyed. And so now I want to get to my final sources, which is that Renee brought this up. If you look at the last page and you look at the Mani Shana, you see something super interesting. We see that you guys know that in the Haggadah, our 4 questions are, what are our 4 questions? Matzah, right? Why do we, the rest of the year having some matzah, tonight only matzah? The second one, maror. The third one, the dipping, right? Okay. Sorry, is reclining, okay? Now that's interesting. Now here you're gonna see something quite radical and amazing. In the Mishnah, in Tractate Pesachim, chapter 10, there are different questions. There's one difference there's one major difference in the questions, okay? There's slight other differences. We have matzah, right? You see where I am in the chart? We have matzah, we have maror, and then we also have something else. We don't have reclining in the Mishnah. We don't have it as one of the 4 questions. Okay? Excellent. It talks about the korban pesach, that we have to have it, that all the rest of the year we have our meat roasted or boiled or whatever else you do with it, but on Pesach night it's only roasted. Okay? And then we have the question about the dips. the dipping. So what do we see here? That one question came out and another question came in. The question of the Korban Pesach fell out. Why did it fall out? Okay, we lost the Beit HaMikdash. Now we have a lot of things in our Seder to commemorate the Korban Pesach. And most people don't eat roast meat, roast lamb on Seder night, although there are a few communities that do that. But we see that in some ways in the Manishtanah, the changes to Manishtanah, the Haseva in a way, not replace the Korban Pesach. But the rabbis saw that there was this vacuum, this emptiness, that they needed to, on the one hand, it's not just enough to keep the memory of the Korban Pesach, but there needed more. We needed more things to connect with, more ways to experience the freedom. And if in the Tanakh, the way Pesach was commemorated was with the Pesach sacrifice and bringing that, the ability to bring that sacrifice was a sign of their freedom. By the time we get to Seder night, we need different things. By the time we get to the post-temple times, we have reclining. So we see here that reclining in this second point, reclining represents the adaptability and flexibility within Judaism. So we see that on the one hand, it didn't necessarily prohibit women from reclining, but it allowed for an adaptability and flexibility over time for women, yes, to recline and even be required to recline. And it also represents that after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, when we felt that it was a huge crisis, when the rabbis when they looked around and thought, how is the Pesach Seder going to look now? And they were able to find ways to continue the experience of moving from slavery to freedom in other ways. And Haseba played a huge role in that. There's one other source I wanted to show you, and then I want to conclude with our final point, which is that in source 10, we've said so far that Haseba, the origins are Greco-Roman, and it's just a question. Did the rabbis borrow it? Was it just general society? Okay, maybe they took a different approach to it. But now I want to show you that the rabbis also found a biblical source for reclining, for Haseba. It's a little bit of a stretch linguistically, but it's a great and beautiful source, which is that in Shemot Rabbah, the Midrash, my students know I love Midrash. The Midrash says in Shemot chapter 13, when the people came out of Egypt, it says that God took them a long way. Why did God take them a long way? So they wouldn't be attacked, right? And God knew they would be afraid. They were coming out, they were fragile, they were vulnerable, they were just slaves, they were vulnerable. And the language that are there is Vayasem, okay? That he took them a long way. But Vayasem sounds a lot like Saviv, okay? Saviv. Okay, it sounds a lot like that. And so the Midrash says, it doesn't mean only that God took them a long way, it also means that God surrounded them. Okay, it's playing with the words here, that God surrounded them, Saviv, with fire, with a wall of fire to protect them. And then it goes on to say that, if you go to the bottom of the paragraph on page 3, God led the people around. From here, our rabbi said that even the poorest in Israel should not eat until he reclines by a second. So the Midrash is teaching him that the fact that the idea of Haseba, the source of an ani, a poor person reclining, that shouldn't eat until he reclines, has its basis in the Exodus story. And in a way, it's really putting its finger on the reciprocity of God taking us out of Egypt, God protecting us, and in our Seder, we're going to recline to celebrate that freedom. And the words are all connected, okay? Vayaseh, Saviv, and Haseba. It's a loose connection, but at the same time, it really highlights this idea that perhaps Haseba has its origins even earlier in the Tanakh, hinted at in the Torah, and that the rabbis found an earlier read for that. So now I want to just conclude by summarizing. We see that Haseba, first of all, is about a physical posture, a physical behavior, which is meant to help us internalize the experience on Seder night of moving from slavery to freedom, of moving from places in our lives when we feel in some way glued, stuck, unable to free ourselves, and we are doing movements to help us get there. The second thing that we see is that Seder highlights the flexibility and adaptability of Judaism. We see the process of women at Haseba, and we see that Haseba in the Manishtanam came to, in some ways, parallel or follow the Korban Pesach, and that in some ways this is the follow-up of that this shows the adaptability and flexibility of Judaism to continue to survive through the hard times. I think the final idea is perhaps the most beautiful idea. And what's your name? Yeah, Shimon touched on this, and so I'm giving you a the other idea is that the Haseba, the leaning, is the idea that we took it from the Romans is true, okay? It's the Greco-Roman. And not only is it not troubling, but it's beautiful. And why is it beautiful? Because we took it and we actually completely redefined it. And so the idea is that we took something which in Roman society was about men behaving licentiously or promiscuously, and certainly not inclusive of everyone around them, and certainly not having a value-based meal, okay? And that what Chazal did was they took this thing and they claimed it and reframed it in a way that they said, in our tradition, the reclining is going to include everyone. It's going to include the poor people. It's going to include the server. It's going to include even the women. So let's see what this professor, Shraga Bar-On, writes in source 14. He says it really beautifully. After the temple's destruction, our sages reshaped the celebration of freedom from slavery into the ritual we know and keep today, adding yet another revolutionary meaning to the concept of freedom. They created the Seder night in the form of a Greco-Roman symposium, gathering of friends and a status symbol of free citizens who celebrate their wealth by drinking, singing, and conversing. However, when examining the Seder structure, we see that it is a subversive demonstration against Roman culture, a spectacular show of an original, innovative Jewish ethos. Unlike the Roman symposium, the Jewish freedom celebration does not emphasize class differences, but eliminates them. There are no slaves that have to serve free people. Everyone is reclining around the table. The whole family takes part, not only adult males. Emphasis is placed on the children's education. Contrary to carefully choosing the guests, the Seder is open to all. The doors are opened at the beginning, and consequently, hearts open as well. And so, as we prepare ourselves to go into Seder night, I want to encourage us and encourage myself and bless us with the ability that when we recline on Seder night, that we think about places where they're still trying to achieve freedom, whether it's personal freedom, freedom of emotional well-being, freedom for parts of the Jewish people, wherever they are, that they should be able to live freely and practice freely, and security and safety for Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. So I wish everyone a Chag Sameach for coming out, and thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Reverend Karen. Miller Jackson, I've got it. We're gonna have a little break now, and we are going to daven Mariv. And those of you who are not davening Mariv can help yourself to refreshment. Let me just, on the back of what Rabbi Karen has just told us, let me tell you about what we're going to do next week. We have a two-part series next week. Shoshana, help me out here. Rav Mendel's is on Monday. On Monday, Rav Mendel Wunsch, who is the Rav of Tfilat Yamin, will be giving a talk on Seder. And I think, having spoken to him, it's going to be talking about the basics of a Seder. Those, perhaps, for those who've never done it before, who are leading a Seder. That's on Monday. Time, Shoshana, 8 o'clock, is it? Yes, I think it's 8 o'clock, and that will be here. And on Thursday next week, I will be doing a session also here at 8 o'clock And the title of mine is this the real way to do a Seder? And I am going to be actually taking a lot of what Rabbi Nick Karen has said tonight and taking it to the next rather radical level. And I'm going to be suggesting that actually, perhaps we should be returning to the way the Mishnah did the Seder in many of the ways, and perhaps the way we do our Seder today needs to be radically changed to go back to the authentic way. So those of you who'd be interested to see and hear about the alternative Seder are welcome to come next Thursday. Next Monday, Rav Mendel will be, I guess, talking about the traditional Seder. Mine will be rather more radical. Well, you'll come on Thursday. No. Come on Thursday and you'll hear all about it. So we're getting the gentlemen who would like a minion, please. Those of you who haven't yet davened are welcome to join. We will be having Ravi Doe, who has just arrived, and Rabbi Cardozo in. It is now 9:30. We will have a break for about 20 minutes. So if you could come back to the room at about 10 to 8, please. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'm good. How are you? He's singing. Sort of. Time.